Well, hi, and welcome to Bad Bleeps of the Bible. All right, everyone, we have our first non-human bleep today. So as I was telling the story of Rahab in the most recent episode, which you should listen to if you haven't already, I kept skirting around the fall and the destruction of the city of Jericho. So in the middle of prepping for that episode, I was like, okay, the story of the Israelites conquering Jericho is interesting in and of itself. And then coupled with the fact that Jericho actually existed makes it sort of a history/Bible convergence idea, story, whatever. And then what was the literal cherry on top of an already delicious Jericho Sunday was the fact that I found the VeggieTales episode where they covered Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. And I was instantly thrown back to my childhood. A childhood, remember, where we didn't have cable because we were religious, but we definitely had VeggieTales on VHS. Fast forward 30-ish years, and I can still remember the songs from that episode, which I don't know if I'm allowed to sing here, but when in the promised land, it would be so done. I loved it. So here I am, shamelessly telling you that our VeggieTales-inspired bleep today is a fabled city whose walls, though formidable, came tumbling down thanks to some wild directions dictated by God to Joshua and the Israelites. Today's bleep is the city of Jericho. As I stated before, Jericho was a real city, a real and really old city, potentially one of the first cities in the world. And if we are to believe the story we're about to hear today, the story from the Bible, which is heavy on the probably didn't happen side of things, just since the Bible, and more specifically the Old Testament, is a series of fables and clever spinnings by kings and storytellers. But I digress. In the words of a teacher friend of mine, everybody say moving on. But back to the subject at hand. If we are to suspend disbelief and trust that the events that transpired with the Israelites in Jericho are real, Jericho would still have been an old city. According to one source, the first permanent settlement in Jericho was developed between 10,000 and 9,000 BCE, where it was first used as a camping ground for hunter-gatherers, basically due to its proximity to a nearby spring. Fast forward a few thousand years, and we have the development of one of the world's first cities and a potential population of around 2,000 to 3,000 people. What was significant, though, was the construction of the massive stone wall that was over 12 feet high and 6 feet wide. And these were the beginnings of the infamous walls of Jericho featured in today's story. And according to one highly questionable source, Joshua arrived at Jericho on Wednesday, March 19th, 1405 BCE. I'm surprised the author of said source didn't give the exact time that he arrived. Slacking, I guess, whatever. Regardless, the Israelites' supposed arrival was over 7,000 years after Jericho's very first initial inhabitants, and 5,000 years after the construction of Jericho's first walls. So she was old. This mini little history lesson for Jericho is simply meant to convey the fact that Jericho was giant, she was formidable, she had been rarely conquered, and she was thickums. Or at least her walls were. We can see why Joshua then sent his 2 spies into the city to scope out just the sheer size of the city that they were dealing with. And if you were here last week, you know that in the process of evaluating and spying out Jericho's girth, the 2 spies were found out, rescued by the harlot Rahab, who is promised safety as well as her family if she hangs the scarlet thread from her window, and as long as she stays inside her home during the battle. So we're picking up at our spy's arrival back in the camp of Joshua. Joshua, the leader of the Israelite army at this time. Sorry, Moses. Whereupon their return, they conveyed to Joshua that, sure, Jericho was massive, but the people of Jericho were also super scared and were ripe for the conquering. But how to overcome those giant walls? Well, Joshua may not have had a plan, but the Lord did and conveyed said plan to Joshua. I have zero idea how this happens. The Bible doesn't indicate it. So we're going to use our imagination. We're going to say that the Lord, God, he, the capital H, wrote it on some Lisa Frank stationery and sent it down from heaven via one of his terrifying eyeball angels from our previous episode with Balaam and the talking donkey. Regardless, Joshua received the message, and while he may have been used to some strange requests and goings-on by God at this point, I truly doubt he expected what he was about to hear. So the directions were as follows. First, all the men of war should, as a group, walk around the city one time for 6 days. So all of the army people, just one time around, once per day, for 6 days. Then, on the 7th day, be prepared for some sevens here. Remember, our Bible's favorite number. Then, on the 7th day, 7 priests with 7 trumpets will hold the Ark of the Covenant and, along with the rest of Israel, will circle the city 7 times. And after doing so, the priests should again blow the trumpets. And it's at this point then that everyone should start screaming for their lives, skrelting, singing a Broadway show tune, I don't know, yelling at the top of their lungs. And when that happens, the walls of the city will fall and the people of Jericho will be yours for the picking. So those are the directions. I bet you didn't see that coming. Joshua obviously was like, okay, cool, and gathered up the priests of Israel and told them to prep the Ark of the Covenant for its big moment, being paraded around the city of Jericho. And it's here that we dive just a little bit into what the Ark of the Covenant, Ark, A-R-K, of the Covenant actually was. And if there's anything that screams Bible magic, it's the Ark of the Covenant, this item right here. So it is a magical chest made from wood and then covered in gold that held the tablets engraved with the 10 Commandments that were engraved by God for Moses on Mount Sinai, both according to the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Old Testament. This sucker truly was pure magic. It supposedly contained the very essence of God himself and was so magical that it would kill anyone who touched it, even if you were just trying to keep that Ark of the Covenant maybe from like falling over. Sorry, a dude named Uzzah, whatever your name is. Tried to stop it, touched it, died. So the Ark of the Covenant is probably also one of the most mysterious relics of all time. Why? Because no one knows where it is. It was lost to time. So this is the Ark of the Covenant. Gold-covered box with the 10 Commandments inside, also bearing the essence of God. You touch it, you die. The incredible holiest of holy boxes that led the Israelites' army in their encircling of Jericho. So they did just that, and everything went swimmingly. The first 6 days, all of the men of the men, the army men, walked around the city one time for 6 days. And then on the 7th day, the 7 priests showed up with their 7 horns, and they walked around Jericho 7 times. Joshua, at the helm, commanded not only his army men to walk around the city, though, once per day, but also commanded both the army people and all of the Israelites to be silent during this time. He states that, "Ye shall not shout, nor make any noise with your voice, neither shall any word proceed out of your mouth until the day I bid you shout. Then shall ye shout." So I'd just like to picture the people in Jericho at this time looking out over their giant girthy walls and seeing a group of men in utter silence walking around your city. It would freak me out. And then to top it all off, on the seventh day, you have the entire nation of Israel in silence walking around the walls of Jericho 7 times. You would both be, I bet, freaked out and a little weirded out at the same time. But we know what happens on the 7th go around on the 7th day. And on the 7th go around, the priests began to trumpet and the people began to yell. And it's here that Joshua says to the people, "Shout, for the Lord God hath given you the city. And not only that, the city shall be accursed, and only Rahab the harlot shall live, because she hid the messengers that were sent. And ye in any wise keep yourselves from the accursed thing, lest ye make yourselves accursed, when ye take the accursed thing and make the camp of Israel accursed. But all the silver and gold vessels and brasses of iron are consecrate to the Lord, and can of course come into the treasury of the Lord." I read that entire statement just to say that maybe the most unbelievable thing from this story may not be the manner that Jericho's walls fell with the people encircling it, but more so that the Bible thinks that Joshua was able to deliver this speech with trumpets blasting and people squelching for their lives at the same time. Anyway, you can probably guess how this ends. The trumpets blast, the people shout, and the walls came a-tumbling down. Minus, of course, the wall that was attached to Rahab's house. And it's here that the Bible tells us that not only was Jericho decimated, but so was the ground. In fact, the ground was cursed, so much so that anyone who tries to rebuild the city past this date would be cursed, as will his firstborn and his youngest son. Crazy harsh. But after all of that, the people of Israel were finally, at last, within their promised land, and would finally be having their first taste of milk and honey. And as for Joshua, the Bible tells us that his fame was noised throughout all the country. So after the decimation of Jericho by the people of Israel walking around the city walls multiple times and then seemingly bringing down those walls with their trumpets and voices, this wouldn't be the last we would hear of Jericho, though, in the Biblio. She rose again in the time of King Ahab, which we're going to be covering him in our Halloweeny episodes in October. And Jericho was also the home of a fun little character in the Bible named Zacchaeus. And Jericho was actually visited by the one and only, he who must always be named, Jesus. So I don't know about that curse because she seems to be doing just fine. So shine on, Jericho, like the wonderful, girthy, and famous BLEEP you are. I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Please feel free to get in touch with me and share your thoughts at badbleepsofthebible.com and at Instagram at badbleepsofthebible. Sources for today's story can be found in our show notes, and please rate, review, and subscribe. Catch you next time, and watch out for people walking in circles and priests with trumpets. Bye.